The ring that saved her. Sofia traced her finger along the diamond's edge, remembering the day Thomas had slipped it onto her finger. The small stone caught the afternoon light streaming through their Yorkshire home's window, throwing tiny rainbows across the wall. How quickly love could turn to something else entirely. She heard his footsteps behind her before she felt it. A sudden searing jolt of electricity that sent her muscles into spasms. The stun gun's crackling filled her ears as she collapsed onto the hardwood floor, her body betraying her as it convulsed uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, Sofia," Thomas said, though his voice carried no trace of remorse. "But I'm bored with you now. And Oliver?" He paused, crouching beside her. "Oliver needs his father more than he needs you." Their 3-year-old son was at daycare, blissfully unaware that his world was about to shatter. Sofia tried to speak, to plead, but her mouth wouldn't cooperate. She could only watch as Thomas pulled out a roll of duct tape. The young man she'd trusted, the father of her child, methodically bound her wrists and ankles. Each tear of the tape echoed like thunder in her ears. When he pressed a strip across her mouth, she saw something in his eyes she'd never noticed before. A coldness that made her wonder if she'd ever really known him at all. Alex, Thomas's friend, stood in the doorway, shifting uncomfortably, but making no move to help her. At 18, he was barely more than a boy himself, yet here he was, complicit in whatever nightmare was unfolding. They carried her to Thomas's car, stuffing her into the trunk like discarded furniture. The drive seemed to last forever, each bump and turn amplifying her terror. When they finally stopped, the trunk opened to reveal a wooded area she didn't recognize. Beside the car sat a large cardboard box. "It won't take long," Thomas said, as if reassuring her. "You'll just go to sleep, that's all." He and Alex lifted her into the box. It was barely large enough to contain her, and the cardboard walls pressed against her sides like a coffin. As they began shoveling dirt over the box, Sofia's mind raced to Oliver. His sweet face, his laugh, the way he'd curl up against her during story time. The thought of him growing up without her, believing she'd abandoned him, sent a surge of desperate strength through her body. She could hear the dirt hitting the top of the box, feel the weight increasing, then a heavy thud, a tree branch she would later learn, and finally, silence. They'd left her to die. The box was dark and growing darker as dirt seeped through its seams. Each breath felt precious, limited. The tape across her mouth made it harder to breathe, and panic clawed at her chest. But then her bound hands brushed against her engagement ring, the diamond that had once symbolized their love. With trembling fingers, she began working the ring's edge against the tape, binding her wrists. Time lost all meaning in that earthen tomb. Minutes or hours could have passed as she sawed through her bonds, each movement bringing fresh terror that this breath might be her last. When the tape finally gave way, she tore the gag from her mouth and gasped in the stale air. Her fingers, bleeding from her desperate effort, found the seams of the box. She pushed, pulled, tore at the cardboard even as dirt rained down on her face. The first glimpse of daylight through the torn cardboard felt like a miracle. She clawed her way upward through the loose earth, every muscle screaming in protest. When her hand finally broke through to open air, she nearly wept with relief. Covered in dirt, bleeding, and shaking with exhaustion, Sofia emerged from her would-be grave like a phoenix rising. She stumbled through the woods until she reached a road where a passing motorist, an angel in a practical sedan, stopped to help. Later, as she gave her statement to the police, Sofia couldn't stop touching the bare spot on her finger where her engagement ring had been. The diamond that had helped to save her life lay somewhere in that cardboard coffin, buried in the earth along with the last remnants of her love for Thomas. In her nightmares, she still feels the dirt pressing down, still hears Thomas's voice saying he was bored with her. But in her waking hours, she holds Oliver close and remembers the strength she found in that shallow grave. She had clawed her way back to life for him, turning an instrument of false love into a tool of survival. The diamond ring had been meant to bind her to Thomas forever. Instead, it had set her free.